My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University Library, and we're conducting an oral history project called Oklahoma Centennial Farm Families, and we're here in Stillwater, Oklahoma with Ralph and Richard Dreessen, and they are former owners of a Centennial Farm in Guthrie or Logan County, and today is June 17th, 2009. So thank you for joining us today. And by the way, Richard is the youngest of 9 children, and Ralph is the oldest of the 9 children. So thank you for having us today. Let's start by having one of you tell us how the farm came to be in your all's family.
Well, the farm at one time belonged to Grandpa Smith. That's my mother's dad.
Okay.
And he didn't make the run himself, but he bought it from a bachelor who had made the run in '89 and started trying to follow the rules of what you had to do to maintain a farm that you ran and staked. And he found out that it was too much work, or for some reason he couldn't commit to the challenge of planting fruit trees and certain things that were required of those who staked claims. So Grandpa Smith one day, somehow or another, ran into him and found out that he wanted to sell it or get rid of it or something. But anyway, he gave him $100 to have his claim, and that's how he originally got the farm. Was from less than a year after the fella found out all the things that he had to do to stake the claim. Finish out the claim.
And how many acres was it? 160.
160.
And how did your grandfather come to be in Logan County? Did he live there already, or do you know?
Well, see, the run was in '89,
right?
Which up until that it was Indian territory, and when the land was opened up, he came in from Colorado.
Okay.
After the land run, he didn't make it for the run, but he came that same year, and that's why he came to Oklahoma. Maybe just looking for the opportunity of the land run and what was available. And at the time, of course, my mother was not yet born, nor I don't think any of the children, his children at that time.
So he bought the farm, and then did he get married, or was he married at that time?
I think he was married at that time when they ran.
I think so.
I believe he was.
In other words, he was kind of adventurous himself, but and the 160 that was claimed, and then he bought another 80 and added on to it. But the actual 160 that he got from this fellow that staked the claim was his, and then he moved there and started making improvements that was needed to handle a lot what he wanted to do in the way of farming and livestock and things of that nature.
So what did he do? What did he raise?
Well, it was a general crop. One thing he liked about it, one place there was a spring on it, pretty close to the hill where the headquarters, where he built a home, all-weather spring, and he got a rocksmith or bricksmith or whatever you call them to build a little cover for this. It was an arched coverway, and put concrete around it, and it would hold water, the spring would. And there was year-round water source at right below the house, and where he later built a barn. And the arrangement worked out just great because the spring was less than a quarter of a mile from the road, and handy for a place to build a house. And so and he built a big barn on it too.
The spring was used as a refrigerator at the time. They had no refrigeration, so the coolness of the spring, they kept the eggs, milk, and things in the spring, and even they had hooks over in the archway that they hung their beef in there when they butchered to keep it cool.
Must have been a pretty good size.
It was.
Was it?
Well, I mean, the frame they put around this spring that come out of this hill, and it was running water year round, and a good amount too. Sure. It was a tank for the cattle pasture. They put a concrete wall around it to where it looked like a tank around any location in a farm, but in fact you didn't realize that it was a spring there because you couldn't tell it from just a covered stone rock frame around it.
Sure. Well, besides cattle, did he raise any other crops?
Oh yeah, it was a general farm. I mean, they
Alfalfa hay a lot.
Alfalfa and corn and maize and
Cotton some at that time too.
yeah. When then they built a house there for hired hand, which was usually a colored person. That and to make this colored person happy, he always had to have 2 or 3 acres of cotton. One of the deals was that was a bonus for this hired hand and his family to have this little cotton patch, but that was just about a 2-acre patch that he had. But the rest of it, there was maize and corn and wheat and oats and alfalfa, kaffir corn, and the crops they kind of grew at that particular time.
Sure. Any fruit trees?
And some fruit trees, right? Yeah, always planted a little orchard.
And to get the products from the farm to the market, how did they do that?
I don't know. Usually it was just selling to people that would come by the house and buy it if they saw that they had a fruit tree there. I don't know that they ever tried to. Oh, once in a while they would, if there was a good crop, you put them in a basket and haul to town, because I don't ever remember setting up a market there at the house. Always took
them to town?
peaches and apples and plums and things of that nature. Would take it to a fruit market someplace.
Well, the farm is located 10 miles southwest of Guthrie, which is the biggest town. There were 2 small towns at the time, not too far away. About 2.5 miles was Seward, which is a little, just very small town, in Nevina, which was quite a bit larger town, which does not even exist today. And Seward's just there by name only. But Nevina, I don't even think you'll find a name.
See, there used to be a railroad track that went off of the Santa Fe. It was a spur that went to Cashin to Kingfisher.
Okay.
And it was just a spur from the Santa Fe line that went within a half a mile of that farm.
Hmm.
A quarter of a mile, probably.
Well, through the years they managed to make enough on the farm not to have a second job somewhere?
Dad had a full-time job, and he developed, had this second house where usually it was a colored family that lived there, but he was a full-time farmer. He never had a part-time job because he saw fences. He liked to have good fences for the livestock to stay home, and we used to cut a big pile of wood every year for winter.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a windmill on the farm up next to the house where he could pump water into the house. And he had a storage tank that was covered, and we had running water in the house from this storage tank, and a windmill that filled it, and it was up on some stilts, and it was covered. It was a square built kind of a shed, but it had stout posts on each corner, and then had a storage tank on top of it that he kept full of water.
Yeah, but you're talking about, this was in the 20s that this came about, but prior to that, when Grandpa Smith first moved there, they built a log cabin and then used the spring. And then later, and actually, our mother was born in 1898.
1898.
And she was one of the first children in the territory, and her older brother. And so they were, but actually, Grandpa Smith did the farming and all this until my mom and dad married, and that was about 1917. So from 89 to 1917 was primarily Grandpa Smith. And then from 1917 on, then my dad married Mom, and he took over the farm. And Grandpa Smith went on to other things, which he was a kind of an investor and a speculator and a oil leaser and quite an entrepreneur. And he left the farm business to my dad and took on these other enterprises.
And your mother had a brother?
She had two brothers.
Two brothers. There were 3 children?
3 children in her family.
And the other 2 didn't want the farm?
Well, actually, they ended up over at Crescent, and there was a farm over there. Then one of the brothers ended up over there on that farm, and that's way beyond my time, so I can't tell you how that happened. Now, Ralph, well, you probably don't remember that either, because that was before you came along.
Well, I don't know just exactly where Grandpa Smith got his original money, but he had a little, and people would want to borrow $5 or $10 or something. They found out that he would loan them money, providing they provided some security. And if in the process that they happened to own some mineral rights someplace that they had inherited that weren't worth very much, at that particular time, because there wasn't a whole lot of drilling and stuff, but he would accept royalty as security. It might be 80 acres of royalty for a $10 loan, stuff of that kind. So he wound up with some mineral rights scattered everywhere that wasn't worth anything, but he had it anyhow.
Trying to be a smart businessman.
Yeah.
Very smart. In fact of the matter is, some of this royalty that he obtained in the early teens and 20s, is still in our family. We still have some of these royalties that Grandpa Smith obtained at that particular time.
Only thing is, he had 3 children, and then in our family there's 9. So I mean, it doesn't amount to too much, but I mean, everybody's got an acre or 2 royalty of our family.
So when the 9 of you were growing up, did you have particular chores assigned to you around the farm?
Everybody did. I mean, when it was potato planting time or garden time, and we always milked cows. We had 8 or 10 cows that we milked every morning and night, and cultivated or did something on the farm every day. Dad was a worker, and he had everybody around him working. He saw that there was somebody had an assignment every day, and of course, raising livestock on the farm, there's always chores. You have to build some kind of protection for the winter time, and having a sow having pigs or a cow having a calf or something, you know. I mean, and there were neighbors that told me that there wasn't any question that Dad probably was a pretty good farmer, and Grandpa Smith, he was always planning too, and Dad had a farm before Grandpa Smith finally let him farm his farm.
And a little bit of practice before he got it.
Yeah.
So what was your particular chore that you were responsible for?
Well, being the oldest, usually went after the cows when they were over in the pasture and bring them into milk and things of that nature. But, you know, probably the best recaller of bringing the cows would be out in the pasture, and you'd bring them in of an evening. They like good fresh alfalfa hay or a small ground grain or something of that nature. Mm-hmm. And then we had a little smaller pasture there right next to the barn that we'd put them in overnight. But in the daytime, they'd had most of the pasture, which would be probably 40 or 80 or whatever dimension that you wanted to turn them in. But they like to eat of them, and that fresh rather than just straight grass all the time.
And Richard, what was your job for the day?
Well, of course, there's quite a bit of difference between when Ralph was doing it and when I started, because the year after I was born, he went away to college, so we really never grew up on the farm at the same time. And so, but all the kids, every one of us had a job, and I can remember the first job I had was in the hayfield. We had a stationary hay baler, and we had to poke the wires through the bale, and then Dad always had at least 2 teams of horses, and sometimes more than that, and and we started out strictly using horses, and Dad got a tractor, the first one probably, about 1940 probably.
Something like that.
He had the first tractor, and so we still used teams, but we did have tractors. He had one of the first tractors in the country to use that.
And your sisters were more in the house type chores, or?
Not really. They all went to the hay field, and they all had a hay job just as the boys did, and they did the same kind of work. And as I say, the perspective we have is quite different because he was the first and I was the last, and we had all those in between that did different things.
Well, in that length of time, the farm changed some too, I would guess.
considerably. And I cannot remember not having electricity in the farm. I mean, we had electricity and running water in the house when I was born, so that was quite unusual for a farmhouse to have that
For
at that
era.
time during that area. And Dad was very creative, and as he said, he fixed this water tower that we had running water. It didn't have any pressure, but it was sure nice to have running water in the house.
And you have indoor plumbing then?
Had indoor plumbing from the time I can remember.
How about you? Do you remember? Did you have indoor plumbing from?
Well, yeah, of some kind. There was the facilities improved with
Sure.
time, but I can remember as a young 4-H'er, our county agent come out and run the first terraces that were run in that area, and he would put me on the rod out there, and he'd sight through his telescope, and we would run terraces, and those terraces were maintained, and they're still in place on that particular farm. That was when soil conservation first started.
And that would have been about what?
Well, in the late 20s.
Late 20s.
But there wasn't a lot of terracing. I mean, that was something that to avoid washes and gullies and stuff, take the water off the fields in a slow manner.
And your father volunteered to let them try on your property to do that?
Yeah. In fact, actually, you know, there it was going to change the way you had to work the ground with the terrace, rather than just have a square field. You know, I mean, but those kind of practices. Dad had been to college, and he had he didn't graduate, but he had some college work, and was a little more progressive than the average farmer.
Where had he gone? Do you know?
He went up here.
OAMC?
Yeah.
Did they also do ponds, make some ponds for him?
Oh yeah, yeah, that was part of it too. Make, well, avoid some washes, you know, that where you could build a pond and have a spillway, and controlled a little bit of washing.
Well, there still is one pond on the place that was built by Team the Horses, Fresnon Slips, that Ralph was involved when they built that pond, and it's still there and still being used as a pond. Another thing I remember is just as a kid was when CCC, the Conservation Corps that they had just prior to the Second World War, they came out and they planted a bunch of trees on our place, and there's some of the trees are still there, as well as at the same time the WPA was putting in culverts down on the roads and things, and those projects were things that were happening when I was just a kid, just barely old enough to start remembering things.
I can remember when Lake Carl Blackwell was being built, a number of our neighbors come over with teams and slips during the WPA days, and it was about the only cash that anybody could get a hold of is come over here at Lake Blackwell and help build it.
That would have been in the late 30s or 40s?
Late 30s, yeah,
because
late 30s.
prior to the war, 41, the war started, so that would be that period of time.
So horses were very important too then.
Oh, we always had quite a few horses, and it was everybody raised their own colts. You know, I mean, you just didn't go out and buy a team. You usually had a team and had a few female mares, you know, and they would raise their own colts and teams. A lot of them. That was a common thing to see a horse with a colt.
Well, how many barns did the original farm have on it? Once they had built the cabin, then what? How many barns?
Well, somehow on that particular place, Granddad built a great big barn. I'm talking about probably 100 by 100.
It was 100 by 125 is what they always claimed. It was a huge barn.
And rough, and one edge of it was where we milked the cows. They came in because hay was handy there, and had a corral, short pens, you know, I mean, where you could keep a cow with calving, or tried to have something in there that kept your weeds down and grass and stuff. But it's on a slope of a hill, and it was always a chore keeping all the things straightened out a little bit. And
Well, where did they get the lumber to build that one? From the farm itself or from town?
well, there were a lot of local sawmills that would come in, and the original, most of it was from that farm or neighboring farm or someplace that they made their own lumber out there on the farm. You'd have to buy some, you know, but most of it was milled right there on the farm.
And then who would be in charge of building it, showing them how to build? Do you know?
Well, I don't know that we had very many people that were trained. They learned on the job, I think.
Well, and is it still standing, that barn?
No, it fell down eventually. Went down probably around 1995, something like that.
So it was up a long time,
It was up a long time. And you'd ask the barns, there was the main barn, which this was a huge barn, and then there was a horse barn that built primarily for the horses, and it was there. And then besides those two big barns and the house, there were just sheds, different places. I mean, I wouldn't call them barns, they were just sheds they used. Some of them are still standing there now, but one or two of them, but most of them are gone.
Like a chicken house?
Well,
Yes,
they had
a chicken house. Always raised chickens.
a hen house, and then a chicken house.
Baby chickens.
Baby chickens, you know, you have mother hens set on eggs and hatch them. And then we had an incubator that you could hatch eggs in an incubator. No hens were around when those eggs were hatching. There would be the chicken house where all the chickens roosted at night, and then maybe you'd have a few hens over here that had some baby chicks, and maybe it was kind of an elaborate chicken house and laying house and for the chickens. And wood, of course, you had wood stoves. You'd have to cut wood and make a big stack of just trimmed trees and limbs, and then you'd get a buzzsaw and cut chunks, and you'd have those for winter for your heating stove, and also small ones for the kitchen stove.
It was a 2-story house, so was the second floor warm during the winter?
Well, it was as warm as you could get it.
Not much, not much.
There wasn't much heat ever got there,
There was a
except by the
chimney.
chimney.
Chimney went up through the house, and it did heat it a little bit from the chimney, but there was no heating units upstairs at all, and it did get cold up there. It's refreshing. And Dad was one of the first horned Hereford breeders in Oklahoma, and one of the first in the United States, I imagine. And he was originally belonged to the American Hereford Association, Horned Hereford Association, still, and registered all his cattle and kept track of his registration. So he was one of the original that did the registration. This was before all the exotic breeds and all the other things that they have now. Mm-hmm. And they had the 3 basic breeds of cattle: Shorthorn, Hereford, and Angus, and that was about all they had, except for the dairy animals.
And when he was raising those, would he take them to market too?
Yes, all of Oklahoma City.
By truck, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, didn't you and Ralph talked about going down to the state fair, driving some cattle down, or to the fair, didn't you?
Well, we used to have a community fair there at Nevada. We'd drive them there from home, about 3 miles, to because he didn't have a trailer or any equipment to haul them in, and just trailed up there to the community of Nevada. That we never did haul anything. I never did take anything to Oklahoma City to the fair, but we used to have those community fairs all over the county. Each community that wanted to have a little fair would have one of their own, using the pattern of the county fair as a guide for things to display.
Livestock and canned goods.
Yeah.
Well, did your mother quilt much?
Well, she belonged to a club, and this club, they would have a quilting project for this family, maybe this summer, and the next summer another family would take on. They would make as many blocks as they could, each, and then put all the blocks together. Whenever the club met, that was what they did mostly then, was quilt.
Mm-hmm. So with 9 children in the family, I'm surprised she had time.
She didn't have a lot of time for quilting. That wasn't her bag. She did a lot of gardening and canned a lot of vegetables and things. But
well, Mama had a goal of 100 quarts of everything, and whether peaches, if they got ripe, or whatever else kind of fruit, or of course she canned all this garden stuff. She shot for 100 cans of peas, or 100 cans of beans, or 100 cans of this or something, and
that'd keep you through the winter till the next season came, huh?
Yeah.
That's a lot of cans.
Well, we had a big family.
Mm-hmm.
There was always extra too, hired hands besides the family.
Well, where would she keep all of those?
We had a cellar, and
there's almost
they were
size of a
stored.
room underneath the house.
Or beside the house.
So what was your favorite thing she fixed?
I didn't have a favorite.
You liked it all, huh? Not strawberry jam or...
Well, I'll tell you, you never expressed a favorite. You ate whatever you ate.
Whatever's on the table you liked. Glad to get it.
So on Sundays, did you have to do your chores and then have time for fun?
Well, Mama was a real good church goer. We usually went to church, Sunday school.
And then came home and did what?
Well, depending on what the group, what group you belong to. There was some that would go fishing, and some would hand noodle along the creek, you know.
Looking for catfish, huh?
Yeah. Of course, I don't think Mama ever had an off day. She had a full day of housekeeping.
But Dad nearly always took off on Sunday. Hardly ever worked on Sunday unless it was harvest. He always planned his week so that everybody could have Sunday off, all the hired hands and all.
So at any given time, how many hired hands would he have?
Well, there would you usually had a family, a colored family that lived there all the time.
All the time.
And then there would just be special times that you had extras. But other than that, why,
But then
you did it all most.
hired Nave worked for him for years, and there's usually I'd say about 4 people besides the kids that were employed to work, especially during harvest time and hay time and all other times.
A pretty busy farm then to have.
Very busy, very busy farm.
Well, raising alfalfa, you know, you get 3 or 4 cuttings a year, and baling time and harvest time. There was never a day that Dad didn't have something that was going to happen out there on the farm. He was accused of being a good farmer, but he always had something to do out there on the farm. There was fixing fence or mowing weeds, or seemed like something going on.
But as a kid, I remember they didn't have combines. We had thrash machines, so you had the binder, you had to cut it with the binder and put it in shocks, and then you had to bring it to the thrash machine and thrash it with make a straw pile. I mean, that was all prior to the combine, so it was a different era and a different way of doing things.
What, did you belong to a ring? A thrashing ring?
You had several neighbors that got, because, you know, this one here would furnish a team with a hay rack to haul bundles. This one here would have a grain wagon maybe that would do that. This one here would have a hired hand to pitch bundles out in the field. And, you know, a straw stack was a pretty important element then in everybody's mind, because it was used in the wintertime for the cattle to eat that straw and kind of winterize around the straw stack. I can remember when combines was first, there were some neighbors up the road there that bought a combine, and my goodness, you know, they're just gonna spread all that grain on the floor, on the ground, you know, waste it. But the main thing was they wasn't going to have a straw stack for winter for the cattle. A combine wasn't going to permit you to have a straw stack. I can remember hearing people really objection how that combine was going to waste all that grain out there in the field, and for a thrash machine, and you'd have a crew that did the thrashing, you know. This one here would furnish a wagon and team, and this one here a hay rack to haul bundles, and this one here would hire. It was a kind of a community project, thrashing was.
Mm-hmm.
One man had the thrash machine, and he just traveled from farm to farm, and the crew followed him.
And your mother had to cook for extra people on those days, I guess.
Right. When you were thrashing for that person, and they furnished them.
Yeah, 20 to 30 hands would be there for the lunchtime.
That's a lot of mouths to feed. That's why she had to do 100 cans.
Well, that's true. And now usually thrashing, on one particular place wouldn't last more 4 or 5 days, and then it'd move on to the next. And so.
So did your father ever get a combine?
Oh yeah.
So he finally got on board with the
Yeah.
new
Oh,
technology?
Yeah.
Well, he got one fairly early in the process. He got about a 6-foot international combine. It was the first one he had, I think, and it was the first one I remember anyway. And then, of course, the Alice Charmer came along with the 5 or 6 foot header. You go put those on a tractor and compare those to those at 35 and 40 foot headers today. It took a long time to go cut 100 acres, whereas they go out and cut 100 acres in a day or half a day sometimes.
What happened to the haystack then?
The straw stack.
Straw stack, yes.
Well, when you had your own equipment and it was plowed under. Yeah, you lost the straw stack when the combines come in.
Well, where did you go to school when you were in like elementary school?
A little community called Navina that does not exist today.
Was it a country school, like all grades in one building?
Yeah. All clear to the 12th grade.
How many would have been in your class?
Oh,
Kids?
about 8.
About 8. And what about Richard when you?
Well, I went to Guthrie school.
So you're
And
a little
so I
bit
went
different
to,
then.
Yeah, completely different situation. Actually, the first 3 girls, or first Ralph and the first oldest 2 girls graduated at Navina High School, and then the rest of us graduated from Guthrie.
So did you have to walk to school or ride a horse, or did they have some type of bus system?
Well, of course, when I was a kid, why, somebody had to take us, and I can remember Mama had a neighboring teenager that was a neighbor that come and help her a little bit, but also she was old enough to drive a horse and buggy. And when I first went to school, we took the buggy and horse, and they had horse stalls up there at the school too. And there were kids that rode horses to school, and quite a few of them walked. And I can remember when I was in junior high, was driving a car to school, and had 3 or 4 sisters. Of course, 6 sisters coming along there, drove the car, and there would be other kids walking to school, and usually would pick them up. We'd get to school with about 10 in a sedan car, and you hated to drive by them and kick dust up, but sometimes you got overloaded with kids by the time you got to school.
We lived at the edge of the school district, so all the way along you picked up kids, or they came along, or they did. I wasn't involved in that, but they talked about that. And a lot of times when it was snowing, they had to use the horses to get through the snow to get to school.
I even rode a sled to school with the horse driven. Built a pretty good little scoop-looking sled with a blanket you could throw over you and drive to school.
The winters seemed to be a little harsher then.
Well, yeah.
They were when you didn't have cars. One interesting project that they talk about, I don't remember it at all. Ralph remembers it. There was a lot of grasshopper infection coming into the country, and Dad rigged up some kind of a machine that was kind of a big sled that had a kind of a cage on the back of it, and put a horse on each side, and they drove it down through the field, and the grasshoppers would jump up in front of this sled and land in this cage and behind. And then when they got to the end, they'd set them on fire and burn the grasshoppers up.
Kind of inventor.
Pour gasoline on them, and it would kill them. Well, you made a cage is what you made, and you had a lid at the top that come up like this, so the grasshoppers hit that, try to fly over it, they would usually hit that door that was across there, and then at the end of the row, you'd let the lid down so you could spray all those grasshoppers that was inside the cage and dump them out then.
Pretty ingenious way of doing it.
Well, it was one way of trying to do it.
Well, later on, there's an old gentleman that came and stayed on the place, and he raised turkeys, and he would take the turkeys out to the field to get the grasshoppers. So every morning he would take a herd of turkeys out, or a flock of turkeys out, and get the grasshoppers with the turkeys. So
there was a railroad track that ran through the place there, and he came from Ohio. He'd hitchhiked on the railroad, and when he got to the little town of Seward, it was east of where we lived, why then there was a track that went from there to Kingfisher, and he got off of that train there at the farm and come up, and he was looking for a job. Somehow or another, he and his family had, I don't know what he had done or why he come him to leave Ohio, but he lived with us from that day till he got his pension, and then he quit working and started raising turkeys, and he didn't live in our house, but we had another house there that kind of fixed him a place to sleep, and he was a bachelor. Somehow or another, he and his family had gotten in something I never did know what it was.
They got crossways somehow.
And left and lived with us till he passed away, and he's even buried in the family plot down there.
Well, your family was open arms, didn't know strangers.
That was
Pretty
about
much.
it. Pretty much. We had plenty of people around, but had room for another one.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the way it operated.
Or what were holidays like in the old home place?
Well, you always had your chores that you had to do. Had cattle, your hogs and beef cattle, and then your milk cows. And it was an activity that you just participated in without anything special hardly. There wasn't any holidays because the livestock need feeding every night and morning.
Like for Christmas, did they put up a tree?
Oh yeah. There was whatever was in season gotten taken care of. Everybody recognized that this is the time for Christmas, or this is Easter, and there was a farm women's club, that met every month, and and Mama belonged to them, and there wasn't any events that wasn't recognized. You know?
Well, I can remember as a kid on the 4th of July, and this was always real special because went over to a station not too far from there, and Dad always bought a case of pop. And that's the only time we ever had pop in the house. And he, on the 4th of July, he would go buy a 24 bottle case of pop, and sometimes we could even have 2 bottles in the course of the celebration, but that was the only time we ever had pop in the house when I was growing up.
Pop being Coca-Cola,
Coca-Cola.
or Coca-Cola?
And Grapeette.
Oh, a little mixture then.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but it just, that was the only time he bought a case of pop, but he did on the 4th of July.
What, did you go into town to the movies?
Well, after I got to high school, I had a cousin that lived just a mile from us. We did, and then of course we'd play party games on Saturday night with the neighborhood. I mean,
A lot of neighborhood parties.
a lot of neighborhood parties.
Most of them were at our house.
Well, Mama belonged to Farm Women's Club, and they met once a month, and a lot of times they were quilting.
Yeah.
They'd start. Somebody had a quilt, you know, and they'd meet at their house, and everybody put in a stitch or two around the quilt, and then in the summertime, about every Sunday afternoon, Dad get together with a group and go noodling, fishing down on the Cottonwood Creek, and it got to be where there'd be a pretty good group come in on that, because you'd catch so many fish and then put them in. How many different people were interested in taking them home in different piles, and somebody would say, okay, who gets this pile? And somebody blindfolded her, turning her with her back, would say, well, let Joe have that one. Who gets this one? Well, Pete gets that one. So forth, you know. But in the summertime, every week, just about, on Sunday afternoon.
Do you have fish for supper?
Oh, well, yeah. Of course, at our place anyway, Saturday was a work day too. I mean, it was just a regular day for whatever chores need to be done on the farm.
Do you recall having a radio? Did you listen to like the Roosevelt Fireside Chats? Or
Oh yeah, radios. Always had a radio. Seemed like I can't hardly remember when it didn't have a radio.
Same for you.
Well, yeah, we always had a radio. Of course, we didn't get a television until I was a senior in high school. When the first television we had in the house was, that would be in '52.
But telephone lines, you know, they when they were ringing, everybody on the line had an opportunity to take off the receiver and hear the conversation.
You had a party line, huh?
It was a party line. I mean, whenever that phone rang, you'd hear clicks on all over the line, and everybody just quiet as a mouse till. Well, of course, you know, it would be 2 shorts and a long, or 2 longs, or something. You know, I mean, there was the length of your rings determined and whether it was a short ring or a long ring,
Which party it was.
whose number it was, and maybe 2 longs and 3 shorts or different combinations.
Do you remember what yours was?
Not for sure. It seemed like it was 2 shorts and a long.
Were the children allowed to answer it?
Not unless they got it first.
There weren't very many phone conversations that time.
But invariably, you'd hear people on the line listening.
It's just nature, I guess.
Sometimes you'd have to invite people to hang up so they could talk to Susie.
Invite them kindly. Or were there any times when the farm didn't make money? Do you know?
Well,
Or at least break
it
even?
was pretty tough at times, I'll tell you that.
What about in the 30s when the Depression was going on?
Well, it was, there wasn't much money anywhere. And in fact, you know, people, well, one of the best things that several of the neighbors and so forth there came up to build Lake Blackwell in the 30s, but otherwise it was pretty tough. You didn't go buy a lot of stuff at the grocery store.
But you raised all your own food, meat and vegetables and all this, and you never, I don't know if there was a depression, you really didn't know it because you didn't have anything when it wasn't. So that's kind of the way it worked.
Clothes hand-me-down?
Well, in our family, yeah, the girls, it was a kind of a process, but usually each one had their own. It wasn't too much. Some handed down, but then each person pretty well wore out their own clothes.
That's what I was going to say. We didn't hand them down, we wore them out, basically.
Did your mother make them?
A lot of them.
Did she?
I don't remember making mine when I came along. But
Oh, well, I mean, the girls did.
yeah, the girls made
Oh,
a lot
we
of
always
dresses.
bought overalls and stuff of that kind. I mean, they're jeans. Overalls mostly.
Mostly overalls at the time.
No, I don't remember Mama making anything for me. Well, you had to buy that.
So let's just describe a typical family meal. What would be on the table?
Mashed potatoes and gravy, the meat, green beans, or navy beans, and probably some greens of some type.
Cornbread or biscuits?
We didn't eat cornbread that much. Biscuits quite a bit. At least I don't remember cornbread much.
And the meat
But
would
fruit, there was always some canned fruit, peaches or whatever. And garden, of course, everything was canned that you could think of.
And with eggs and chickens, you'd have fried chicken some?
Oh, a lot. Yeah. Fried chicken. In fact, actually, that was required where you start with baby chicks and grow them up to fryers. The meals didn't change a lot. Once in a while you'd get a special meal, but
But always plenty to eat, though.
Right. Well, you know, and milk. That was all you just expected to have it.
So the farm when you all were there was actually a working farm for 50 years or more?
No,
Oh yeah.
100 years. I mean, it was always a working farm, and still a working farm.
It still is now?
Yeah. Yeah, and
What do they grow? What do they farm now?
well, of course, wheat's become a big product of the farm, and then use a lot for cattle now. I mean, it's more than the other part, but still raise cattle and produce those, and we're both still involved in raising cattle ourselves and do the other things. Put up a lot of hay. Hay was such a big item.
Alfalfa. It was a full-time chore by the time you got this patch cut and baled, and the next patch cut. This one over here was growing, and about every month you'd come back and mow this patch, and of course in season there would be some of the neighbors that would have some fruit that would bear, like peaches or plums or apples or something, you know, an orchard that they'd have, or you'd have off of a tree, and of course Farm Women's Club would meet once a month, and they would have different ideas they would express, and then the farm organization like the Farmer Bureau, Farm Union, they would have an annual activity of some kind that was a family affair.
There was an ATA, Anti-Thief Association, that met and had oyster suppers in the winter and ice cream socials in the summer, and a lot of community activities like that you didn't have organized sports and stuff.
But no one even thought anything about having to walk 2 or 3 miles to a job, you know. In fact, actually, a family would in our place there would be a small house down the lane that a family would live in.
Would you have family reunions back on the farm?
Oh yeah, with your grown up. I mean, Moore. See, Dad had 3 brothers that lived at Moore, and they took turns of coming up, or maybe all of them would come up at one time. And then these Farm Women's Club, they would have a meeting, and then Nevada was a small community, and our high school kids at that time would have skip-to-maloo and party games, you know, that you'd swing and out in the dirt, you know, on a grass lawn or something. That was for partying in high school. It'd be the high school bunch that would have skip-to-maloo and parties usually about every Saturday night, unless there was something else special on.
But we were from a large family, and they did come in. There's a lot of family, and still we get together and still talk about when they were little, coming to the farm and things, and a lot of times spend the night at our place and all.
So how many bedrooms would the old farmhouse have with 9 kids?
Well, actually, 5 bedrooms, and or 6. There was one took a wall out, but so that was 6 bedrooms at one time. And then, of course, any place else you wanted to sleep, but you could have 6 bedrooms
Well,
available all the time.
I imagine the kitchen table was quite large.
Well, yeah,
Well, we could all get around it.
Hmm.
it reached from one wall to the other almost. I mean, there was usually 10, 12 at the table each meal.
Do you have a favorite memory from those days?
Well, I was kind of a mixed, quite a bit different than his because part of the time I lived in town, part time in the country. We kept the farm, and sometimes we'd be in town to go to school, then come home on the weekends, go to the farm, then be in the farm all summer. And then, so mine was a different kind of a raising. So I have as much town as I do country in my background.
So you
Well, I never did live in town. See, even when I was in college, would go back to the farm, you know. Dad had gone to college, so he expected me to, so I came up here to college when I graduated. In fact, back then, hitchhiked from that usually take me to Guthrie, and then I could hitchhike from there to up here to college.
up to Stillwater.
Yeah.
So you went here when it was Oklahoma A&M
Oh yeah.
before the name change.
Yeah. See, I came up here in '35.
The campus has changed quite a bit since then, hasn't it?
Well, you know, the thing about hitchhiking, I could walk from home to the interurban, which is a streetcar from Guthrie to Norman, and catch the streetcar to Guthrie, and walk through Guthrie, and then start hitchhiking from Guthrie to as far as I could get, usually maybe to Coyle, and then maybe catch another ride. Invariably, you'd catch a ride, and old boy said, "Have you got a quarter to buy gasoline?" And said, "No, I don't have a quarter, otherwise I wouldn't be out here hitchhiking." You know? But once in a while, you'd have to buy a gallon of gas for an old boy that picked you up to give you a ride. And then you'd get to Perkins Corner, and then you'd have to catch a ride from there to Stillwater. And
How long would that take you?
it'd take a half a day.
At least.
But
How often would you do that when you were in school?
well, not too often. Usually I'd ship back my clothes to have them washed in a box, and Mama would wash them and then put them back in the box and ship them back over here.
So she didn't get out of work even when you left home.
That's right. I mean, she got to wash my clothes. We had mailboxes, you know. I mean, they actually that you put your clothes in and ship them. You had a card on one side that gave the address of home, and on the other side of the card it had the address in Stillwater. So all you had to do was flip that card over and insert it on the side of the cardboard box.
And you used the box over and over?
Oh yeah.
Could you? They didn't do that when you were in school, did they,
No,
Richard?
no. No, it was a different time.
So when did you graduate from OAMC? What year?
39.
39. Well, that was unusual too for them to send you to school during when the Depression was on. Then you were in college.
Yeah,
that
a
was
little bit.
no, that
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
unusual.
Of course, coming out of the Depression at that time, but then it still was.
But
then, I mean, he came over here, and the next sister was a year younger, went to UCO, well, Central State College at that time, but or Central Normal College, I guess it was at that time.
I hadn't ever even seen a game, but came over here and stayed in the dormitory, and some of the guys like to play poker, and so they taught me how. And first time I'd ever seen a poker game even. But we used mills, and mills were, they had aluminum mills that was worth 1/10 of a cent, and a half a mil was worth half a cent, and that's what you learn with. You could sit there and play with poker all evening, and go home and have 17 cents maybe.
A pretty good day, huh?
Pretty good evening. You had a whale of a haul. But that's when Mills was in operation.
You don't remember the mills, I'm sure.
I have no clue, no.
No.
I'll have to go
They
look.
were, yeah. They were used during wartime, especially. They had the mills, which was, and that's what they usually used for taxes. Instead of pennies, they had so many mills. And
Yeah, I've seen that.
10 mills make a penny, so just a smaller unit.
So do you, either one of you remember visiting the Carnegie Library in Guthrie?
Oh yeah. Not a lot, but
Well, I grew up a half a block from the Carnegie Library. That was my townhouse, and so I was up the Carnegie a lot. And when I was in high school, I had Teen Town downstairs at the Carnegie Library, and I spent a lot of time there.
It's a pretty building.
Beautiful building. Beautiful building.
well, I lived on the farm all the time I was in high school, so.
And when he was the ag teacher at Guthrie, and I was in his class, and as well as one of the
Yeah.
novelties that we had. And
That must have been interesting.
And I had a brother just a year older than I was. We were both in his class for 4 years while he was teaching and we were in school.
And was he harder on you two than he was the others?
Probably not. About the same.
About the-
Oh, trying to treat them all alike. Yeah, I was there 10 years, so, trained them for judging teams and things of that nature that we participated in here at Interscholastic and judging contests.
So you kept your hand in agriculture just a little bit different.
Yeah.
Went from actually-
Yeah, well, as a teacher, you're working with kids and trying to motivate them to get some livestock and do a little better job of taking care of whatever they had, and showing, exhibiting, and judging contests, and covering the subject pretty much.
Come up to OAMC for Roundup, 4-H Roundup.
Well, of course, we were in FFA. I was a 4-H member when I was growing up, but VOAG and FFA became more of a program for high school students.
Okay.
Yeah, when you were in high school, you were in 4-H and
Oh, yeah.
did come to Roundup.
Yeah, they didn't have a VOAG program in the school where I grew up. Back then, if you were particularly good in school, you got to dust erasers. You got to go take them outside, find a rock to dust them,
If you were good.
That, if you were good, specialty of the teacher.
Well, when we came in, you said the farm, you had sold the farm in 19...
about
90
2000. No, it was about 2003, I think it was.
Any particular reason why?
Well, there were 9 kids, all had 1/9.
It's kind of hard to farm one night.
Yeah, it would be.
And we knew that someday one of us was going to die, and that meant that many more involved. So we decided probably the best way to resolve the problem was to sell the farm, and that's what we did. None of the 9 was able to or wanted to buy the farm, and so it was easy to sell outside, and that was the reason for it. And since we sold it, 3 of them have passed away, so our timing was about,
Pretty good.
it was just timing.
So that $100 investment paid off for itself many times over, I'd say.
Many times, many times.
Did all 9 of you go to college at least some college?
Well, most of us did.
Most of you?
2 or 3 of us got master's degrees, and then everybody went to some kind of schooling.
So education was important for both of your
Very
parents.
important. Yeah, very important. Yeah, I think 5 of us graduated with at least a bachelor's, and 3 or 4 of us got masters, and then any of us got to the PhD. But then some of the grandkids have, but then the rest of us didn't. So, and went into education. I went into education. Sister was in education as well as Ralph was in education. So we were.
So will the new owners let you come back and visit?
Oh yeah, yeah. And I rented the place for about 3 years after we sold it from the guy that bought it. The fellow that bought it was just kind of an investor, a lawyer in Oklahoma City.
So is the spring still?
It is still there.
Logan?
The house is still there, and it's really a historic thing. There's a picture of it in this book if you want to look at it. It's
Well, the farmhouse, though, you said is not.
not there.
But there's still another house on.
No, the spring is about the only structure on
It's
The
left.
spring house.
the spring house is the only
There.
structure left on the place that was there.
You should put watermelons in it in the summer.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I'm sure they did.
yeah. Well, kept milk down there too. You know. Yeah, it was the coolest place we had around the place. Yeah, you see, it became a rent place sometime. Why there wasn't anybody there taking care of upkeep, and so there were occasions when it's everybody's business. It turns out to be nobody's business, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But Dad shingled that barn by himself one time.
The big 100 by 125.
Yeah.
That had to take him a while.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a long, big job. Big
All
job.
summer, I think, every evening or something. He'd do a little bit.
Well, so what did he do once he sold the farm, or he gave the farm to your mother? Well, no, let's back up. What did your grandfather do once he gave the farm to your mother?
Well, this was talking about he kind of become an entrepreneur and
did
went
other
on investing
Okay.
and I don't know what all he did, but he, left the farming to my dad, and he went on.
Left it in good
Well,
hands and moved on.
Of course, actually, he still owned it up until he died, and then Mama inherited it. That's what happened there.
They just worked it.
Yeah.
So because he had the grandpa had a place up other side of Crescent, and the son got it, and Mama got this land here.
Well, sounds like she got the better deal with the fresh spring on it. And
Well,
close to
they got a
Guthrie.
nice place up there.
Do they?
Yeah.
Well, they had added to it, actually at one time, I think they had 760 acres between what Dad had, what Mom had, and what they got together, so at one point, that's how large it got, probably.
That'd be a lot of fence to keep up, wouldn't it?
A lot of
Yeah.
fence, a lot of fence.
Anything? No. Bob, ask all my questions. Is there anything else you want to add before we sign off?
Well, I just might say that my folks, Mom and Dad had 9 children, 33 grandchildren, and someone did the figuring up, and I think about 2 years ago they figured up there was 254 descendants from just Mom and Dad, and then that's direct descendants, blood descendants. So quite a prolific bunch. We did our part of populating the world.
Helping Oklahoma become Oklahoma.
Well, we try to get together the original, all 9 children have able to all get together every other year, isn't it?
Every other year. We've done that for about the last 10 years. And we were together 2 years ago, and all 9 of us were still living and still together. And then we had a group, our Thanksgiving, we had about 147 there for our Thanksgiving dinner. And that was our group.
Lots of cooks, I hope. Not just,
Lots of
not
cooks.
just
Everybody
one.
brought lots of food. We had enough food to feed the army.
Well, where could you have that many people?
Well, in our house, in our yard,
In there?
in our garage, in our barn. So
Hopefully it was a pretty weather day.
it was a little cold, but then
Yeah,
we
it was a
made
little
pretty
bit
good.
cool.
But
You have pictures there of our group?
I don't have the group here.
You don't have a group
Not
picture?
not the whole group. I've got them at home, but not here. But that's this is just
Well,
not.
you got some of them.
Well, that's part. But
Oh,
then-
that's yours.
Yeah, this is just part of the groups. But then we've got a whole bunch of. I haven't got the whole bunch here.
Well, wasn't that part of them?
That's part of them. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's.
Part of them, it would take more than one picture to get 147 in.
Well, we
anyway.
do have one picture that's got 147 in my house. One picture, and you can see everybody in it. You can count them.
Well, it's been our pleasure to spend this morning with you all, learning about your farm. It's been very nice. So
Well,
thank you for letting us.
appreciate you having an interest.